The planet is heating up.
The oceans are becoming filled with plastic.
Change starts now. Change starts now.
We're on a countdown
To zero waste. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
This is the Zero Waste Countdown Podcast. Here's your host, Laura Nash.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Zero Waste Countdown podcast and radio show. Today, we're speaking with Lisa Zimmerman. She is a Ph.D. researcher in the Aquatic Ecotoxicology department at Goethe University in Frankfurt and part of the PlastX research group at the Institute for Social Ecological Research. She led a study called Benchmarking the In Vitro Toxicity and Chemical Composition of Plastic Consumer Products. So we're going to learn basically what's in plastic, if we should be worried about it, that sort of thing. So Lisa, thank you so much. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. I'm glad to be here.
It seems like you're doing some very important work because a lot of us don't really know what's in plastic or if it's a problem or if we should be worried or not. So can you tell us, what kind of harmful chemicals does plastic typically contain in their sometimes complex mixtures?
Okay, yeah, first of all, in the plastic production, a lot of different chemicals are used in order to receive the rich properties of the respective product or material. These are, on one hand, intentionally added chemicals, like, for example, additives. These may include flame retardants or plasticizers or colorants or antimicrobials. And then on the other side, there are still monomers in there that did not polymerize. And then furthermore, we also have solvents, lubricants, or adhesives in there. And besides these intentionally added chemicals, there are also some reaction products or side products which originate in the compounding, or there are impurities that get into the plastic during the production, and those are not intentionally added. So you see there is a lot of different chemicals in there. On one hand, there's those which are intentionally added, and then there are some which are like byproducts of the processing.
Mm-hmm. So the plastic maker might not even know what's in the plastic themselves, it seems, right? If there's unintentional ingredients? Yeah,
that's true. So they usually should know what they intentionally put in there, but then, as you said, there are some reaction products or some impurities even the producer might not know.
How do chemicals release from plastic?
So maybe I tell you a bit about the ground structure of a plastic product. So on one hand, you have the polymer backbone, which is, for example, the polyethylene or the polypropylene. And that's like the ground structure. And then you have all the chemicals, which we were talking about before, which are added. And these chemicals, they are not covalently bound to the polymer backbone. And that means that they can leach or migrate into the content of the packaging or into the surrounding media
if they're not bonded. So what was the aim of your study?
So what we all know is that that plastics contain chemicals that are harmful to human health, like, for example, BPA of phthalates. That's some chemicals which get a wide public attention. Mm-hmm. But then plastic can contain many more chemicals, and most of them they are unknown, and we hardly know anything about the health impacts. And this is why we wanted to investigate the overall toxicity present in plastic products. So of these chemical mixtures which are in these products. And for this aim, we included a wide range of products and polymer types, and also wanted to see if some plastic types or materials are better than others. So to say if, for example, polyethylene is always more safe than, for example, polyvinyl chloride with regards to the chemicals they include.
Yeah, I've read about tea bags for one thing that there's been studies and they're trying to say it doesn't leach that much. And then in our CBC, I've read articles that tea bags really leach a lot of plastic into the hot water because, of course, destabilizing bonds.
Yeah.
So boiling, why does boiling release these things so much? Does it release it a lot more than, say, if you just put oily foods in a plastic container?
So with regards to your first question, so a higher temperature enhances the diffusion or the migration of the chemicals out of the product. So it goes a lot faster. So you should also, for example, prevent to heat your food, which is in a plastic container, in a microwave, because that will also enhance the release of chemicals. And then with regarding to the fatty ingredients or the fatty content, this really depends on the chemicals itself. So, for example, if the chemical is hydrophobic, which means that it dissolves easy in fatty components, then a fatty surrounding will also enhance the migration of these chemicals. But then there might be other chemicals which are better dissolved in water, and then they might not transfer so easily in fatty surrounding.
Okay, so it depends on what it is. How did you analyze your research questions? What did you do in the study?
We selected a wide range of plastic products, and in total it were 34 products, which we regularly can buy on the market. In this case, it was in German supermarkets. And then we took these products, for example, it was a shampoo bottle or a food container or a water bottle, mostly items with food contact, but also some items without food contact. And we cut these products in little pieces, and then we extracted them using an organic solvent. And then after we contained or we gained these extracts, we used a combination of cell-based experiments to determine the toxic effects of these chemical mixtures we extracted out of the plastic product. So to clarify that a bit, so we tried to get all the chemicals which are used in a product out of it, so that we have the whole chemical mixture, which we call the extract then. Beside these cell-based experiments, we also did chemical analysis to determine the amount, the origin, the function, and the toxicity of the chemicals in the mixture. And hereby we also tried to include the unknown or the unexpected chemicals.
Do you think there are chemicals that kind of got through that you wouldn't catch? Like when you're testing for, let's say you're testing for a flame retardant, there's probably a certain process for that. So there are processes for all the chemicals?
So there might be that we did not catch some chemicals because we used one kind of solvent to get all the chemicals out of the plastic product. But it might be that some chemicals, they are not released in that solvent. Like like we said before with the fatty content or something, that they don't release into that solvent. So it might be that there are some chemicals in the products we did not consider in the end.
Yeah, it seems very complicated. It seems it would be easier if the companies just told us what the chemicals were they were using instead of
that's definitely the case.
Yeah, because I can't imagine I couldn't do an experiment like this. That's for sure. I would not know what I was doing. But
I mean, that was the interesting part, that we had these mixtures and we didn't know what is in there, because I also tried out from the producers to find out what is the composition, but that was actually not possible. And I said, okay, now I have this complex mixture and I don't know what it is. And now I, on one hand, try to find out what is this toxicity of this mixture, because we can determine toxicity without knowing what it is, but then only from the mixture. And then on the other hand, to say, okay, but now we want to find out what are the single ingredients. And that was not so easy in the end.
Yeah. Plastic seems so simple when you look at it, but then, when we talk about these sorts of things, it's actually quite complex and seems a little complicated. You were testing for different things. So oxidative stress, cytotoxicity, oh my gosh, I'm not sure if I'm saying this right. Estrogenicity?
Yeah,
Did I say that
exactly.
right? Okay. And anti-androgenicity.
Yeah.
So can you tell us what those are and why you were testing for those?
So first of all, to classify it a bit, we tested, so these are all different endpoints, and we used cell-based assays to test for them. So we conducted the study in vitro, so meaning we were using bacterial or yeast or human cells. So to only classify that it does not allow a direct conclusion on human health effect, but serves as a first screening whether plastics contain chemical mixtures that can potentially be toxic. But now coming back to your question, so the oxidative stress and the cytotoxicity are more like general screening, or to say it the other way around, are two endpoints which are rather unspecific. So we use them to investigate whether the extracts contain chemicals that are potentially problematic for the cells, that might interact with the metabolism of the cell or induce or the production of reactive oxidant species. So it's more like a screening tool which reacts to a wide variety of harmful compounds. And then on the other hand, the estrogenicity and the androgenicity are specific endpoints. These are these are both endocrine or hormone-like. They test for endocrine or hormone-like effects. And estrogenicity means that something acts like the female sex hormone estrogen. And anti-androgenic means that something inhibits the effect of the male sex hormone testosterone. So, and we tested for these latter endpoints because it has been previously been reported that plastics can contain chemicals that have these endocrine effects.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm really worried about that because I'm a mom. And so I just don't want to be giving young children things that are going to mess with their hormone levels. So that's one of the main reasons why I use glass, or why I don't give my kid canned food, because I know the cans are lined with BPA. I know that this is we're going to save this question for later, but are you worried about BPA? Do you have should we be worried?
I want to put it a bit the other way around. So I would not say that it's especially BPA I'm worried about. So BPA is the chemical which people associate with plastics and are always worried about. And it got a lot of public attention, and there has been a lot of public pressure that producers phase it out. But the thing is that the producers, they use alternatives that are not necessarily better, but are just not regulated yet, and which did not receive so much attention up to date. So, for example, BPS or BPF, or some totally different compounds. So I'm rather worried about that these other chemicals don't receive that attention, and there's no pressure that those are phased out, even though they might have a similar effect, or even worse, we don't know.
Yeah, it could be worse, which is very scary. And if you're a parent and you're trying to do the right thing, and you buy plastic that's BPA free, then it could have what you're saying, BPS or BPF, and it might be less studied. It might be doing the same thing. We had a scientist come on the show who said that BPA is a failed contraceptive.
Yeah, okay.
from the 1940s, which is so crazy. I was like, oh my
Yeah,
gosh, like that's so weird that someone would take it off the shelf like decades later and decide it makes plastic kind
yeah,
of.
I totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah. So you were testing things. So you basically went to the grocery store and picked up some common plastic items. So were there types of plastic that had the highest toxicity? Like, were there differences you noticed in different products?
Yeah, so what I said already is that there's a different types. So these types, I mean, different polymer types. For example, like the polyethylene or the polystyrene. But we also tested polyurethane, polyvinyl chloride, and polylactic acids. And all the products made of the three I just named, of these three polymer types, contain toxicity and induced really strong effects in our cell-based assays. And on the other hand of the spectrum, like the products based on PET or HDPE, where the products with the least toxicity. However, I have to say that the majorities of all the products we analyzed contained somehow or some toxicity. But there was, on one hand, for each polymer type, there was at least one product with toxicity. And that means that we can say, okay, polyurethane, polyvinyl chloride, PLA seem to be worse kind of in our study, and PET and HDPE seem to be better. But then for the other polymer types, for example, for polystyrene, we don't really know. And then we also tested 4 or 5 products per polymer type. So at that point, I would rather say that it's really specific to the product itself, whether it is toxic or not, and not so much up to the polymer type.
So it could be the same type of plastic, but
Yeah.
two different items, and then those two different items could vary quite a lot in terms of being toxic.
Yeah, for example, you can have one PS food container and then one PS yogurt cup, and they might contain totally different chemicals and a totally different toxicity. And then on the other hand, you might also have two items which look completely the same, like, for example, 2 yogurt cups, one made of PS and one made of PE, and then one of them might be containing toxic chemicals and the other not. So it's not, there is no chance for the consumer to differentiate, like visually, whether one product is better than the other with regards to the safety.
Wow, that's wild. So there's really nothing the consumer can do in terms of choosing different types of plastics necessarily.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would suggest to avoid some types of plastics, like, for example, PVC,
Oh yeah.
which it usually contains a high amount of additives, a high amount of chemicals, and for which we also saw in our study that it contains a lot of toxic chemicals or toxic chemical mixtures. And then on the other hand, I would also avoid products. I mean, I don't know how is it in Canada? Do you have labeling on the products, which plastic type it is or not?
Yeah. We have numbers on the bottom, so usually you can look at the bottom of something and it'll be like a number 1 to number 7.
So I
usually.
guess that's the same numbering as we have here in Germany. So PVC would be, for example, number 3. So you should
Okay.
avoid number 3. And then there are also some plastic types labeled, or some products labeled with number 7. And number 7 can be all other polymer types which are not included in the numbering from 1 to 6. So here it is not transparent what polymer type it is. So I would also avoid using those. Yeah, and then there are some other recommendations, as I said before, to not heat up the plastic because that increases the leaching of chemicals, and to avoid to store your food in plastics, because the longer the food is in there, the more chemicals might get into the food out of the plastic. And then, as you said, especially it might be more true if the food is fatty or acid or alkaline, because that might favor the release of chemicals. And then what you can always do, and even if there is no living without plastic today, we can still try to minimize it and buy fresh food or unpacked products.
Absolutely. Yeah. And a lot of us that are listening to the show probably are on that lifestyle path, really, is where we're just trying to avoid packaging for the environment, but also for like the health of our bodies, right?
Yeah, totally. But then when I might add something, what we also need to consider if we take alternatives instead of plastic, they might not necessarily be better. So it's not always that plastic is the worst material which exists. So to only also keep in mind that there might be also other materials we are using that might contain some chemicals which are not necessarily better than those included in plastics.
Are you thinking about like metals or something, or like PFAS treating paper to make paper hold liquid?
Yeah, things like that. But then also a little bit about like the so-called bioplastics or plant-based materials, which are basically, like the bioplastics are either made of renewable resources or might biodegrade in the environment, but they are still plastics, and there's still chemicals which have to be used in them. So
Wow.
yeah.
You found some toxicity in bioplastics during your study, did you?
So in this study, we only analyzed one type of bioplastics, which is polylactic acid, PLA, and that's a bio-based and a biodegradable plastic. And actually, we found in all those 4 products, we found the chemical mixtures included in them induced a similar unspecific toxicity as those included in the PVC. So with regard to the unspecific toxicity, not the endocrine-like effects, but still they seem to contain a lot of chemicals where we don't know how safe they are.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't know that. So not only could we be getting chemicals in ourselves, but if we put those bioplastics into you usually need a high heat composting facility, but then oftentimes that's used for dirt or, so maybe we're also getting, chemicals out into, I know that they use it sometimes for like restoration projects, like for rivers or like parks and things. So maybe
they usually use it, right? Because there's especially for applications in the environment, also for agricultural foils or something like that. Because they said, that can easily biodegrade, but then even when it biodegrades, these chemicals, they must go somewhere, so they will also go into the environment.
Yeah, I worry about that with my home compost, just putting things in there, and I kind of wonder, I've put a paper towel in there before, and then I'm like, I wonder if there's things in that paper towel that's gonna but I probably think too much.
But I think the paper should be all right. Better than the plastic bag.
Yes, I definitely keep that out. What else did you find out in your study?
I just want to mention that we are currently conducting a study on bioplastics where we screen a wider range of different bioplastic types. So hopefully in the near future, we know more about not only polylactic acid, but whether these same effects are also true for other types of bioplastics.
So we can watch out for that probably coming soon?
Yeah, hopefully. But now getting back to the original study. So what I already said, we found a lot of toxicity in this product. Might it be rather some chemicals which induce unspecific effects, or also some chemicals or chemical mixtures which acted similar to the hormone testosterone. But then on the other hand, what I said in the beginning is that we conducted a chemical analysis. And here what we found is that a product can contain up to over 100 chemicals, one single product. And that's a whole lot when we imagine that.
Oh, yeah.
And then most of these chemicals, they are unknown, so we can't identify them like with our current used or regularly applied methods. So in the study of our product, or the percentage of more than 80% of the chemicals we could not identify. So we don't know what chemical it is. Mm-hmm. And when we don't know what it is, we can't say, okay, this chemical has this toxicity. So that's a further somehow problematic. And then what I also kind of mentioned before already, or what I found astonishing, is that something that looks the same can actually have a completely different chemical composition, like the example with the yogurt cup. And then what we further found is that we tested food contact materials, as I said, and also some materials without food contact. And our hypothesis was that we would find more toxicity in the materials without food contact. But interestingly, also some of the materials with food contact contained a really high chemical toxicity.
Yeah, it's really disturbing that we don't know what a lot of these things are. Is there something that like the producers can do, or like is there something we could do politically, or should there be a regulating body on plastic? Like, is there anything we can kind of do to improve the safety of plastics?
Yeah, I think there are different levels where we can act. What you mentioned already, like we have on one hand, we have the consumer. We talked already a little bit about what the consumer can do before. Like, for example, the storage, to not heat up the plastics, to try to minimize it. But the producer the consumer can also just ask for alternatives in the supermarket to put some more pressure on the supplier or the producer themselves. And then there's a lot what the producer can do. So they can try to optimize the production process, or to develop plastics that require less chemicals, so that we reduce the chemical complexity of our products. And then what we also saw in our study, that there are safer alternatives already on the market. So there were some products which were actually safe with regard to the chemicals they include. So if the producer would make openly available the chemical composition of this product, others could use that and orientate on these. So there is so it's not hopeless to put it like that. So there is already good alternatives on the market. But then one thing which is really important that or which could help a lot is that the producer is transparent on the chemicals they use in their products. Which they are at the moment not necessarily are, because they kind of want to keep the recipe, and then on the other hand, or that's why they might not make it openly available.
Like competition wise? Or like toxicity wise, because maybe they know.
I would rather say competition wise.
Oh, interesting.
Just to leave it like that. Because if they have a product which they sell well, they might not want to share how they produced it.
Mm-hmm. And I saw that you spoke at the Food Package Forum, which is pretty cool. So do you see food packaging companies, are they interested in sustainability or health?
Actually, I have not been in so close contact with a lot of food packaging companies themselves. But from the little exchange I had, as well as from some personal impressions I gained, I have or I can at least say that I have the feeling that the food companies are actually interested that their products are sustainable and that they do not produce any harm. But I can't give you any percentage how many actually are caring about it. So that might also depend on the company. But I had the impression that they do care. The problem or also the challenge they might face is that it's also not easy for them to generate products that are safe. So that might be on one hand that there are a lot of different companies which are included in the production of just one product. So there is one company producing the pre-production pellet. Then there is a second company, for example, producing the plastic film, and then another one is producing the box, and so on and so on. And during each step of the production, there's another set of chemicals added. And since they don't communicate them so well or transparently throughout this whole processing, they might not know which chemicals are actually in the end products. So that's again the problem with the transparency. And then on the other hand, there's also this non-intentionally added chemicals we talked about before, which they themselves might not know. But then I don't want to let that through like an excuse. So what they could actually do is like to test their products for the safety. Like for example, what we did, that they combine like cell-based assays to test for the overall toxicity of the chemical mixture, so they can even assess toxicity of chemicals they don't know. And then on the other hand, use chemical analysis to identify the chemicals in there. So it might not be an easy job for them, and they are, but there is still some way forward what they could improve. But I would not say that they are not interested in it.
That's an interesting point about how packaging can have many different types of plastic or different parts. Like even a big tub of yogurt is like one kind of plastic, and then you take off the lid, and then it's got like a plastic bag kind of cover that you have to take off. Or even like a lot of water bottles, I think it's like PET that the bottle is, and then like the cap is different, right? So, I've never thought about that before, that a food company could be packaging from multiple like suppliers, I guess.
Yeah, on one hand, these different polymer types in one product, and then on the other hand, like that one, even just the lid might go through so many different hands, and everyone adds something to it, making it really a really complex composition in the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I just feel like we're so far off from like having this all regulated, or like have it nice and clean so we know it's not being toxic. Like it seems like we've got a big job to do to make sure that our food, I mean, particularly I'm worried about food because that's what we're ingesting, right?
That's because it's most relevant for human health, but then on the other hand, you also have the environment, right?
They go hand in hand, yeah.
So if it ends up in the environment like trash, there might also be chemicals released. But then, as I said, I mean, there is already kind of hope because there are these good alternatives. And I think, you just have to get this change started, that the chemical complexity is reduced, and that the safety is considered more in the production of plastics.
This is really cool that you're doing all this work. So what got you into plastics?
So, I think what interests me so much about it is that it's so ubiquitous in our everyday life. So we are always surrounded by it. But still, we don't know so little about it, like about the actual composition, about the safety. So there are some topics always popping up, like microplastics, but then I had the feeling that these chemicals in our products and this safety doesn't get the attention it needs somehow. So that was one thing, that is so omnipresent and then so little studied. And then on the other hand, the project I'm part of is an inter and transdisciplinary project, like you introduced it already. It's called PlastX. And
with an X. It's PlastX.
Exactly, yeah. You can also Google that if you want to find out more about it. So the interesting thing about the plastic project is that it takes a holistic approach to investigate the role of plastics on one hand in our society, and then also the opportunities of plastic, and then also potential problems associated with plastics. And it tries to find solution, but also asked whether the alternatives are better than plastics. So the interesting thing here is this, like an interdisciplinary research, that we not only focus on the topic from one side, but from very different disciplines. And we also try to exchange with diverse stakeholders in the field to integrate their opinion and to in the end find solution strategies which are actually can put into reality, or which are realizable, or which are feasible objects also for the different stakeholders involved.
Yeah, and you mentioned trade-offs, and I'm worried about that too. So plastic is easy. It's a byproduct of oil and gas, so there's lots of it around. It's, I think, very terrible for the environment. But, let's say we just switched from plastic shopping bags to paper bags, and we have to start worrying about the forests that are going to be providing them and if they're going to be sustainable. And we talked in this episode about the bioplastics, and I had no idea that they had like any chemicals that could be toxic in bioplastics. But I did know from another scientist that came on the show that bioplastics are almost like just as strong as regular plastics in the ocean. So if you just throw like a bioplastic cup in the ocean, like it's not just going to break down into corn and be like fish food. It's actually going to it's going to stay there and cause problems, and it can still kill marine life and stuff like that. So yeah, I worry about that.
Yeah, that's totally true. It does not mean only because it's labeled biodegradable that it degrades in every natural surrounding. So, for example, in your example, in the ocean. So it might only biodegrade under certain conditions, like typical composting conditions, and then only if it's under these conditions for a really long time. So, yeah, it's a bit difficult, I would say.
It is difficult, yeah, because plastic is so valuable to people and to businesses and stuff. So it's a tricky problem that we have. But, when you go to some places that don't have any waste disposal, and you see it everywhere, like on the beaches or in the, rivers, it's a lot of rivers are full of plastic at this point. It's quite an alarming problem. But it's been very interesting talking to you about the chemical aspects, because I've always wondered about that. Like, we know that microplastic is getting into fish, but is it a problem? Is it just totally like a neutral substance, or are there toxins that are attached to it? Like, what are they doing to the fish when it's accumulating in them? So yeah, I've been kind of worried about all that stuff.
Yeah, we actually, there's also another study we're just performing on microplastics, but there we also put the focus on whether it's the chemicals included in this plastics and also in the microplastics which drive the toxicity of microplastics, or whether it's the characteristic of the particle, like the shape or the size, which induces negative effects on, for example, organisms in fresh water.
Oh, wow. I've heard that plastic can act as a sponge as well. So even if the chemical's like not inherently made in the plastic, like maybe some chemicals floating in the water could attach to the plastic. I don't know if you've heard anything about that. I don't know if that happens or not.
That actually can also happen, that that the plastic, or that the chemicals adsorb to the plastics, and that
Yeah.
they are released at a later point again. So yeah, that's totally true.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, they said it was a sponge. I remember someone saying it can act like a sponge and just kind of
Yeah,
pick
that's
up.
a good expression, I think.
So you mentioned a couple things to, we can try to avoid heating our food in plastic or microwaving it. We can try to avoid storing our food in plastic. So I have glass containers. I have a pantry full of jars of all different sizes, and I bought from Costco. I don't know what would be the equivalent in Germany. It's like I don't have a membership, but it's like a giant box store basically, and they
Okay.
sell really nice thick glass containers, like really nice big ones. And they do have a plastic lid, but I don't pile my food high enough to ever touch the plastic.
Yeah.
So hopefully that's okay. But are there other things that you do in your life to avoid plastic or to be sustainable?
Yeah, as I said already, I try to minimize the plastic I use, although it's not possible living without it. But like to buy food on local markets, to buy it unpacked, and then also I don't know if these also exist in Canada, but in unpacked stores where you can pack your food yourself in, for example, glass jars.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so I think especially with food, there are a lot of options to reduce plastics a lot, especially when you think about these stores. And then,
Yeah.
yeah, just minimize the contact. I mean, as I said, yeah, like the storage, and then even not. I mean, there are these plastic containers which say that they are microwave proof or something, but still, I just avoid these things to heat something in the container itself.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone's really testing for these things except for like people like you, right? Like I'm sure a lot of scientists are, but I just wonder if the companies, I don't think companies are testing their packaging themselves. It just doesn't seem like something they do. I'm sure it's like an expensive process.
I mean, there are some, at least in the EU, there are regulations that that there are some chemicals which are not allowed. They are listed chemicals which should not be used in plastics because they're known toxins. But then they only list like some chemicals, and there might be new chemicals on the market which are not yet listed. And then they
Oh, yeah.
also not test like the whole chemical mixtures included in one product. So they might test one chemical they use, but the toxicity of a mixture might be different than the toxicity of just one chemicals, because also the chemicals might interact with each other, leading to different effects.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that too. That can absolutely. Yeah. I think we talked about that like a couple years ago on the show that we don't
Yeah.
know how certain things. So yeah, one thing might not be that bad, but then when it reacts with another thing that's in there, it could do some crazy things that maybe aren't so good. So yeah, I forgot about that part too. It's wild. It's
Yeah.
wild
And complex.
and very complex. Yeah. And like I said, it looks so simple when you look at a yogurt container or something. You're like, it's just like white plastic.
Yeah.
But then there's a very big background to it and to how it was made.
Yeah, yeah. And then what I question myself sometimes is, why do we not just need one material for a yogurt cup? Because I mean, one material seems to be, yeah, to fulfill the function. It needs to be a yogurt cup. Why do we need more materials for it? So if we know one yogurt cup is safe, why can't we just take this yogurt cup? But yeah, I guess
Hmm.
that's because there's many different companies which exist, and they all want to make profit and produce their own materials. But yeah, sometimes it's an overwhelming complexity out there.
See, if there was more standardization, like you're talking about, like if every yogurt cup was the same, then it would probably make it so much easier to recycle them because
As well, yeah.
yeah, you don't have to sort through the different kinds and all that stuff. I find that with glass too. We just did an episode on glass, and
Yeah.
a glassmaker was saying there's just so many different beer bottles, wine bottles, champagne bottles, like liquor bottles, and like non-alcoholic beverage bottles. That there's just so many. Like it's just too complicated to sort and return. But if you had like one standard beer bottle, and Ontario, like where I live in Canada, we kind of used to do this a little bit. Like
Yeah.
a lot of the major beer brands, they all had that standard brown little bottle, and you can return them, and then it's super easy to like sanitize and redistribute them, right? But if every brewery is using a different bottle, it just becomes a very difficult program to return those.
Yeah, that's true.
bottles,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the same
Yeah.
with, as you said, with plastics, with the recycling, it would make it so much easier to just have, like, for example, the PS yogurt cup and not also the, I don't know, polylactic acid or PE yogurt cup. But then I think that's just difficult to standardize it. I think that's not like.
Yeah, it's a very complex problem, and I love yogurt, and I feel very bad buying it, so I don't. And then I'll buy like the biggest tub that I can, and it's actually really easy to make as well. Like if
Yeah.
you just put it in some milk, you can get a whole other batch. But then you got to get a container of milk as well, or you can do vegan. Like if you're vegan and you want to do these things, you can make vegan yogurt and stuff. But I just wish there was a returnable yogurt container, because it would just suit my life so much, and I don't mind dropping it off again, you know, so I can bring it home. Because I found a company that does glass containers of yogurt,
Yeah.
but they don't take them back. So now I'm stuck with like a dozen little tiny glass containers, and I use them, but like I don't think I'm ever really going to use 12 of them. So I had to stop buying those as well, because I just have too many.
Yeah, that's, I mean, even if it's glass, it would be like, sustainability wise or recycling wise, it would be so much, or from an ecological point of view, it would be so much better to recycle it and not to use single use glass containers, because then you only use it once, and in the end the ecological footprint might be much higher than than of a plastic product you use once, because you just use a whole more resources for the glass container. So that's something also be to considered when thinking about alternatives. Like if you not only want to consider the toxicity of something, but also some ecological footprint, the overall ecological footprint. So there's always like you always have to, could you say, gamble a bit? Do you care more about the chemicals and then you should maybe take the glass container, or do you care more about the CO2 emission and then you might choose the single-used plastic instead of the single-used glass? But then it's always better to have something which is recycled, which is used multiple times.
Yeah, just reusing things is it's so great, but it's so logistically expensive for a company to produce a food product and then somehow collect their containers back and then sanitize them and then reuse them. Like it seems like it would save them money, but it also seems complicated, and then you've got to put like trucks on the road or something, you know, to bring them back. So it's tough.
Yeah, I mean, it would be easier if they have some kind of incentive, or to have more incentive to take it actually back and to reuse it.
Yeah, we're actually having this problem in the Arctic as well. I just watched a film on this where everything has to be shipped in to Iqaluit, like one of our northern Arctic towns in Canada, and everything's either shipped or flown in, but nothing leaves. So they just have this massive dump, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and they're just not really sure what to do with it. Because and one guy was saying they even have to fill the ballast tanks of the ship, because you don't want a ship sitting too high, but when the ship drops off all the cargo in the Arctic, then it's got to go back empty, and so they have to fill tanks with water.
Oh yeah.
And when they could be taking garbage back, but it's just, you know, it's a complicated thing, and people have to do it and make money and stuff. So yeah, it's a complex problem. But studies like these are really helpful, because they bring awareness to what we're eating and what's going into the environment, and that there are better solutions and stuff. So this has been great. It's been very great talking to you. So thank you so much, Lisa.
Yeah, thank you a lot. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it was great. That was Lisa Zimmerman. She is a PhD researcher in the Aquatic Ecotoxicology department at Goethe University in Frankfurt.
Change starts now.
This is the Zero Waste Countdown Podcast.